The first sign that something was wrong wasn't what my mother said. It was what she didn't. Every Thanksgiving since I was a little girl, my mom had greeted everyone the same way. She'd hug the women, clap the men on the shoulder, fuss over whoever brought dessert, and complain that the turkey wasn't going to stay warm if people kept standing in the entryway. That routine had survived divorces, illnesses, job losses, and even my father's funeral. So when she opened the front door and simply looked at me without smiling, I noticed. "You're here," she said. No hug. No happy Thanksgiving. Just those 2 words. I forced a smile anyway. I brought the sweet potato casserole, the one Dad always liked. She stepped aside without answering. The warmth of the house hit me first. Turkey, cinnamon, fresh bread, rosemary. Every familiar smell wrapped around me like an old memory that didn't realize it no longer belonged to the present. Behind her, I could hear my brother Ethan laughing in the living room. Football played on the television. Someone's kid was running down the hallway. Everything sounded normal. Maybe I was imagining things. I carried the casserole into the kitchen and found Claire arranging dinner rolls in a basket. "There you are," she said with genuine relief. I was starting to wonder if the snow would slow you down. It almost did. She hugged me quickly before lowering her voice. "Mom's been stressed." Claire always chose careful words. Stressed, tired, overwhelmed, never angry, never controlling, never unfair. She'd been translating my mother's behavior into softer language for nearly 20 years. "I figured," I said. Claire gave me a look that lasted only a second before she turned back to the rolls. It was the kind of look people give when they want to say something but aren't sure they're allowed. Before I could ask, 12-year-old Owen burst into the kitchen. "Aunt Helena." He wrapped his arms around my waist hard enough to nearly make me drop the casserole dish. "Whoa, you made the marshmallow potatoes?" "I did." "Yes." He pumped his fist like his favorite team had just scored. "You promised." "I remember." My niece Lily appeared behind him. At 16, she had grown almost as tall as her father. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi, Aunt Helena." "Hi, sweetheart." She hugged me too, though more gently than Owen. When she stepped back, she glanced toward the dining room. It was quick, barely noticeable, but something about that look stayed with me. "What?" I asked. She blinked. "What? You looked like you were checking something." "Oh," she shrugged. "Nothing." Before I could ask another question, my mother walked into the kitchen. "Owen." He immediately let go of me. "Wash your hands." "I already did." "Do it again." He groaned dramatically before disappearing down the hallway. Mom looked at the casserole. "You used pecans." "Just on half," I said. "Like always. Dad liked pecans, but Ethan doesn't." "I know what your father liked." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room became strangely quiet. Claire suddenly became very interested in folding napkins. Lily looked at the floor. "I wasn't correcting you," I said carefully. "I simply mentioned." "I heard what you said." I nodded once. There wasn't much else to do. Mom picked up the casserole without another word and slid it into the oven. Conversation resumed only after she left. Claire exhaled. "I'm sorry." "For what?" She hesitated. "I don't know." Neither did I. At least, not yet. My father had been gone for 4 years. Some days it still felt impossible to say that sentence without expecting him to walk into the room carrying another armload of firewood. Dad had never been the loudest person in the family. That title belonged to Ethan. Mom controlled every room she entered without raising her voice. Dad simply listened. When he spoke, people usually stopped talking because they knew he had waited until he actually had something worth saying. After he died, something changed inside this house. Not all at once. Slowly, like paint fading in sunlight. Family dinners became shorter. Phone calls became less frequent. Birthdays became obligations instead of celebrations. I told myself that grief looked different for everyone. I told myself we were all adjusting. Looking back, I think I confused distance with healing. By late afternoon, the house had filled with relatives. My cousin Andrea arrived carrying 2 pies. Uncle Ron immediately started arguing with Ethan about football. Kids chased one another through the hallway, while Claire repeatedly reminded them not to run. For a little while, I relaxed. I helped refill drinks, washed dishes as people cooked, checked on Grandma's stuffing recipe. It felt almost normal. Almost. Then I noticed something strange. The dining room table looked smaller. Not physically, just more crowded. Mom always spent days planning Thanksgiving seating. She believed certain relatives couldn't sit beside each other. Children had assigned chairs. Grandma always sat nearest the kitchen. Everything had its place, including me. Without thinking much about it, I counted the chairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I counted again. There should have been 12. Maybe one was still in the garage. Maybe Owen had dragged it somewhere. It wasn't worth asking. Not yet. Still, for reasons I couldn't explain, I looked around the room one more time. Lily was standing in the hallway, watching the table. When our eyes met, she looked away almost immediately. The uneasy feeling I'd been carrying since I walked through the front door settled a little deeper. I couldn't have known it then, but somewhere inside that dining room, before anyone had even carved the turkey, a decision had already been made. I just hadn't discovered what it was yet. Dinner was always announced the same way. My mother would stand in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, wipe her hands on a dish towel and say, "Everybody, let's eat before everything gets cold." She did exactly that. For a moment, I felt relieved. Maybe I had imagined the missing chair. Maybe someone had simply forgotten to bring it in from the garage. The conversations from the living room drifted toward the dining room in one noisy wave. Uncle Ron kept talking about football. Andrea laughed at something Ethan had said. Owen practically sprinted toward the table until Claire reminded him to slow down. I stepped aside to let everyone file in first. It had become my habit over the years. I wasn't trying to be polite anymore. I was trying to stay out of everyone's way. As people claimed their usual seats, I scanned the table again. Grandma's chair. Uncle Ron. Andrea. Ethan. Claire. Lily. Owen. 2 family friends. Mom at the head of the table. Every place was set. Every plate matched. Every folded napkin sat perfectly in the center. There were still only 11 places. I frowned. Maybe there was a folding chair waiting nearby. I looked toward the kitchen. Nothing. I glanced into the breakfast nook. Empty. For the first time, I felt a tiny knot tighten in my stomach. I caught Claire's eye. She looked at the table, then at me, then away. Too quickly. Something wasn't right. I forced myself to smile and walked toward my mother. "Did we forget a chair?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she adjusted a serving spoon that didn't need adjusting. Then she picked up a gravy boat and moved it 2 inches to the left. Only then did she look at me. "No. I thought maybe one was missing." "It isn't." I waited. "So, where should I sit?" The room wasn't silent yet. People were still pulling out chairs and passing dishes. No one seemed to be paying attention. My mother rested both hands on the back of Ethan's chair. Then she looked directly at me. "There isn't a place for you." I actually smiled. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to believe I'd heard her correctly. "What? There isn't a place for you?" "I'm sorry," I said with a little laugh. "I don't understand." "You don't?" She tilted her head slightly. No room for disappointments. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't echo through the room. She said it the way someone comments on the weather. Calm. Matter of fact. Final. Every sound stopped. The television in the living room kept playing, but inside the dining room it felt as though every person had forgotten how to breathe. I looked around the table. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Uncle Ron stared into his mashed potatoes. Andrea suddenly became fascinated by her water glass. Claire looked like she wanted to disappear. Owen's eyes bounced between the adults, completely confused. Lily looked horrified. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck without saying a word. I searched every face for someone, anyone, to laugh and say this had gone too far. Nobody did. I turned back to my mother. "If this is a joke." "It isn't. I drove almost 2 hours. You chose to. I brought dinner. You brought a casserole." I blinked. "I don't understand what I've done." She folded the dish towel neatly over the back of a chair. "I've spent years pretending everything was fine." She spoke calmly enough that anyone walking by the house would have assumed we were discussing grocery shopping. But there comes a point when people need to face the consequences of who they've become. My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out the last empty chair at the table. For one impossible second, I thought she was finally making room for me. Then she folded the chair shut, right in front of everyone. She carried it across the room, opened the pantry door, placed the chair inside, closed the door. The click of the latch sounded louder than anything she'd said. When she turned around, she brushed her hands together. There, the table was complete. Without me. I looked at Ethan. Are you really okay with this? He hesitated, just long enough to give me hope. Then he sighed. Maybe this isn't the best day to do this. I waited for the rest of the sentence. It never came. Not, Mom, stop. Not, Helena belongs here. Just, maybe this isn't the best day. Claire whispered, Ethan. He kept staring at the table. My throat burned. Not from anger. From the effort of keeping my voice steady. So all of you knew? No one answered. That silence answered for them. I looked at Lily. She had tears in her eyes. She looked as shocked as I felt. So she hadn't known. At least not completely. She whispered. Then she stopped herself. My mother noticed. Lily. It wasn't loud. Just her name. That was enough. Lily lowered her head. Something inside me finally gave up. Not exploded. Not shattered. Just gave up. I set my purse down long enough to remove the oven mitts I'd stuffed inside after bringing the casserole. I placed them neatly on the kitchen counter. I picked up my coat. No one tried to stop me. No one asked me to stay. As I reached the front door, Owen called after me. Aunt Helena? I turned. Are you coming back after dinner? I wanted to tell him yes. I wanted to tell him this was all some terrible misunderstanding that the adults would fix before dessert. Instead, I smiled the best smile I could manage. I don't think so, buddy. His face fell. Oh, Claire quietly covered her mouth. Ethan still hadn't looked up. My mother remained exactly where she was, waiting, as though my leaving was simply the final item on her Thanksgiving checklist. I opened the front door. Cold November air rushed inside. No one followed me onto the porch. The door closed behind me with a soft click. For several seconds, I stood on the front steps without moving. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. Children threw snowballs across the street. A couple walked their golden retriever. Someone down the block was hanging Christmas lights a day earlier than my father ever would have allowed. Life continued. Mine had just changed. I climbed into my car, closed the door, and rested both hands on the steering wheel. I still couldn't answer the simplest question. What had I done that deserved to lose my place at my own family's table? I don't remember starting the engine. 1 minute I was sitting in my car, staring through the windshield at my mother's front porch. The next, I was halfway down her street with the heater blowing warm air against my freezing hands. I drove on instinct. Every traffic light changed when it was supposed to. Every turn felt automatic. I couldn't have told you the names of the streets I took if my life depended on it. My mind stayed behind. Back at that dining room table. Back at the empty space where a chair should have been. Back at my mother's voice. No room for disappointments. I said the words out loud. Just once. Hearing them in my own voice somehow made them feel even stranger. What does that even mean? The inside of the car answered with silence. For years, whenever my mother criticized me, there had at least been something attached to it. I worked too much. I didn't visit enough. I wasn't married. I spent too much time helping other people. I should call more often. I should host family dinners. I should make more of an effort. There was always a list. Tonight there had been nothing. Just a verdict. Somewhere outside the city limits, my phone buzzed through the car speakers. Mom. I stared at the screen. It rang until voicemail picked up. A few seconds later another call came. This time it was Ethan. I let that one ring too. Then another. Claire. I almost answered. Almost. Instead, I kept driving. The phone finally went quiet. About 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. Marcus. I hesitated before pressing the button on my steering wheel. Hey, I managed. His voice was calm, the way it always was. You sound awful. I laughed once. It came out more like a cough. That's because I feel awful. What happened? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not because I didn't want to tell him. Because I genuinely didn't know how. How do you explain something that doesn't make sense? My mom. I began. Then I stopped. Marcus waited. He had always been good at that. At the hospital, patients talked to him because he never rushed uncomfortable silence. I tried again. I swallowed. She took my seat away. Another pause. I'm sorry, he said gently. I don't think I heard that right. She removed my place at Thanksgiving dinner. Silence. I mean literally. More silence. There wasn't a chair. Marcus finally spoke. Helena. I wish I were joking. What happened before that? Nothing. There had to be something. I thought so too. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I keep replaying the whole afternoon. I walked in. I hugged the kids. I brought dinner. I asked where I should sit. And she said there wasn't room for disappointments. Marcus didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Not louder. More careful. Has she ever done anything like this before? I thought about it. No. Something close. I let out a slow breath. Not publicly. That answer surprised me. Because it was true. She had embarrassed me before. Corrected me. Compared me to Ethan. Questioned my decisions. Dismissed my opinions. But always in smaller ways. Private ways. Ways that could be explained away. Tonight had been different. Tonight she wanted witnesses. Marcus seemed to reach the same conclusion. Everyone saw it. Everyone. What did Ethan do? He asked if today was the best day. And then, nothing. What about Claire? She looked like she wanted to cry. The kids. Owen didn't understand. And Lily? I closed my eyes for just a second at a red light. Lily looked scared. For you, I think. I wasn't sure. For everyone. The light turned green. Cars behind me started moving. So where are you now? Marcus asked. Almost home. Good. I don't feel like going home. I know. I don't really feel like going anywhere. He let that sit for a moment. Then he asked the question I hadn't been able to ask myself. Helena. What? Do you actually believe you're the disappointment your mother says you are? I answered too quickly. No. Then, after another mile of quiet road, I spoke again. I don't know. That second answer was the honest one. Because when someone spends 40 years teaching you that love depends on meeting impossible expectations, part of you keeps wondering if maybe this time they're finally right. Marcus sighed softly. I've known you for 11 years. I know. I've watched families thank you because you helped their parents walk again. I know. I've watched patients ask for you by name. I know. I've watched you cover extra shifts so coworkers could stay home with sick kids. I know. You drove 2 hours today carrying your father's favorite casserole. I smiled despite myself. It was sweet potatoes. I don't care if it was broccoli. That finally earned a real laugh. A tiny one, but real. I don't know what happened at that house, Marcus continued. But I do know this. What? People don't accidentally remove one chair from a Thanksgiving table. His words settled somewhere deep inside me. Because he was right. The chair hadn't disappeared. Someone had counted every guest, chosen every place setting, folded every napkin, then decided there would be one fewer seat. Mine. It hadn't happened in the moment. It had happened long before I knocked on the front door. For the first time that night, a new question replaced the old one. Not, what did I do? But, how long had this been planned? I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pantry door. Not my mother's face. Not the dining room. Just that pantry door closing after she folded up the last chair. Somehow, that part stayed with me more than anything else. It wasn't impulsive. She hadn't pointed at the door and told me to leave. She had calmly removed the chair, folded it, carried it across the room, and put it away, as if she'd been rehearsing it. When my alarm went off at 5:30, I had already been awake for nearly an hour. For a few seconds, I forgot what day it was. Then I saw my dress hanging over the bedroom chair, exactly where I dropped it the night before. Everything came rushing back. I thought about calling in sick. Instead, I got dressed for work. People recovering from strokes didn't stop needing physical therapy because my family had fallen apart. That was one thing I could still count on. The hospital looked exactly the same as it always did. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. The volunteer at the front desk wished everyone a happy Friday. Nurses hurried past with clipboards. Patients waited for appointments. Normal. It almost felt comforting. Morning. I looked up to see Marcus standing outside the therapy gym, balancing 2 paper coffee cups. I guessed you'd need this. I definitely do. He handed me one without another word. For a moment, we simply stood there. You sleep at all? He asked. A couple of hours. Any more calls? I pulled out my phone. I turned it off when I got home. Have you looked yet? I hadn't. Part of me didn't want to, but another part knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up. 23 missed calls. Most were from Ethan. 3 from Claire. 5 from my mother. 2 from numbers I recognized as relatives. There were also a dozen text messages. Marcus didn't ask to read them. He simply waited. I opened the first one. Mom, you embarrassed yourself by leaving before dinner. I stared at it, then opened the next. Mom, you always make everything about you. The next. Mom, you owe everyone an apology. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I genuinely didn't know what else to do. Marcus watched my expression. Bad. Worse than I expected. I handed him the phone. He read only the first message before giving it back. I don't think you need to read the rest right now. I probably don't. Instead, I opened Ethan's first text. Can we talk? The second. Please answer. The third. Mom's upset. I almost smiled. Of course she was. According to the messages, she was the injured party. Not me. Claire's texts were different. I'm so sorry. Please know I never wanted that to happen. Call me whenever you're ready. Those 3 messages were the only ones that made my chest loosen even a little. At least someone had seen what happened for what it was. Marcus nodded toward my phone. Any explanation from anyone? No. No one saying why. I shook my head. Just apologies for how things happened. He frowned. That's not the same thing. I know. It's like apologizing because it rained instead of admitting someone turned on the sprinkler. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. I keep thinking there has to be something I'm missing. There might be. You think so? I think families don't usually explode over one dinner. His answer lingered with me through my morning patience. Mrs. Calloway was celebrating her first week walking without a cane. Mr. Jensen finally managed to climb 3 therapy steps without stopping. Normally, those victories filled my day. That morning, I smiled when they smiled. I encouraged them. I praised every small improvement. But every quiet moment between sessions brought me back to Thanksgiving. Around lunchtime, I checked my phone again. One new voicemail. From Ethan. I almost deleted it without listening. Instead, I pressed play. Helena, it's me. His voice sounded tired. I know you don't want to hear from anybody right now. A long pause. I think we should talk. Another pause. I don't know everything that's going on. That caught my attention. I know last night looked terrible. Looked terrible. Not was terrible. I'll explain what I can. His breathing crackled softly through the speaker. And, I'm sorry. The voicemail ended. I listened to it twice. Not because it answered anything. Because of one sentence. I don't know everything that's going on. Until then, I'd assumed Ethan knew exactly what our mother was planning. Now I wasn't so sure. Marcus found me sitting alone in the staff lounge. You listened. I nodded. What do you think? I stopped. What? I think my brother believes he's telling me the truth. Marcus leaned against the vending machine. And I don't think it's the whole truth. He folded his arms. So now you have a choice. I know. You can pretend none of this happened. I can't. Or I find out why my own mother decided I didn't deserve a chair. Neither of us spoke after that. Outside the lounge window, light snow had started falling again. Soft, steady, covering everything in white. For years, I'd accepted my family's version of every disagreement. I'd apologized first, made peace first, taken responsibility first. This time felt different. This time, I wasn't looking for a way to fix things. I was looking for the truth. And for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I had the feeling that the truth might be far more complicated than a single cruel sentence spoken across a dining room table. Saturday morning was unusually quiet. No alarm, no hospital, no patients waiting for me in the therapy gym. Just the steady hum of my refrigerator and the sound of snow sliding off the balcony outside my apartment. I made coffee out of habit, poured 2 cups before realizing there was no one else there, and dumped the second one into the sink. My apartment had never felt especially lonely. Until now. I carried my mug to the dining table and noticed the casserole dish I'd brought home the night before. It was still wrapped in the same towel I'd used to keep it warm. Untouched. The realization stung more than I expected. I'd spent hours making my father's favorite Thanksgiving dish. No one had taken a single bite. My phone buzzed. Claire. This time it wasn't a text. It was a phone call. I stared at her name for nearly half a minute before answering. Hi. Her voice was soft. Hi. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Finally she said, How are you? I almost laughed. I don't think there's a good answer to that. No, I guess there isn't. Another silence settled between us. Claire finally took a deep breath. I've been trying to figure out what to say. You don't have to defend anyone. I'm not. She sounded tired. I just wanted you to know that I didn't know exactly what your mom was planning. Exactly. She caught herself. I mean, you knew something. I knew she was upset. About what? I honestly don't know. I closed my eyes. Claire, I'm serious. I asked her 3 different times this week if everything was okay. And she kept saying Thanksgiving was going to be different. Different. The word settled heavily in my mind. Did she mention me? No. Did she say she didn't want me there? No. Did she ask about seating? Claire hesitated, long enough for my stomach to tighten. Claire. She insisted on setting the table herself. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. She never does that. I know. Usually you help. I always help. So why didn't you? She wouldn't let me. That was new. Every Thanksgiving I could remember, Claire had handled most of the table while my mother focused on the food. It had been their routine for years. So she made the seating chart herself? Yes. When? Wednesday night. The timing hit me immediately. The chair hadn't disappeared at the last minute. By Wednesday evening, my mother already knew there would be no place for me. Marcus had been right. This had been planned. I should have questioned it more, Claire whispered. I thought maybe she'd invited someone else. But she didn't. No. And there were still only 11 seats. Yes. I leaned back in my chair. I counted them. I know. You noticed. I saw you counting. A painful silence followed. I wanted to say something. What stopped you? Claire didn't answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was afraid she'd turn on me. That answer hurt because I believed it. Claire wasn't weak. She was careful. There was a difference. Living in my mother's orbit taught everyone to calculate the emotional cost of speaking up. Some people challenged her anyway. Most didn't. I keep asking myself what I did, I admitted. I honestly don't know, Claire said. And I don't think Ethan does either. I frowned. He sounded confused in his voicemail. He is. He knew about the missing chair. He knew there weren't enough seats. But he didn't stop her. No. Why? Claire sighed. Because he thought she had a reason. The sentence landed harder than I expected. Not because Ethan believed our mother. Because believing her had become automatic. No evidence required. Just trust. Did he ask what the reason was? He tried. And she told him she'd explain later. I stared at the untouched casserole. Has she? I don't think so. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something shift. Not relief. Perspective. If Ethan didn't know the whole story, if Claire didn't know the whole story, then maybe there was a story neither of them had been allowed to hear. Before hanging up, Claire said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. Helena. Yeah. I've been part of this family for 17 years. I know. I've seen your mother angry. I know. I've seen her disappointed. I know. But I've never seen her rehearse something. I sat up straighter. What do you mean? The words. What words? No room for disappointments. Claire paused. It didn't sound spontaneous. A chill ran through me. It sounded practiced. After we ended the call, I walked into my spare bedroom where several old storage boxes were stacked against the wall. Most of them had come from my father's house after he died. I hadn't opened some of them in years. Photo albums, Christmas decorations, old tax folders, a cardboard box labeled in my father's handwriting, garage receipts. I smiled despite myself. Dad labeled everything, even things no one else would ever organize. As I looked across the boxes, a thought quietly formed. For 4 years, I'd accepted every explanation about my father's estate because my mother handled it. I never asked questions. I trusted her. What if that trust had kept me from seeing something important? I wasn't looking for money, or revenge, or proof that my mother was a villain. I wanted one thing, the truth. And for the first time, I realized the answers might not be in another conversation. They might be hidden somewhere my father had carefully labeled years ago. By the time I carried the first storage box into the living room, my coffee had gone cold. I didn't bother making another cup. Something told me that once I started opening those boxes, I wasn't going to stop. Most of them had been sitting untouched since my father's funeral. Every now and then I'd think about organizing them, but life always seemed to get in the way. Work became busy. Another holiday came around. Something broke in my apartment. There was always a reason to wait. Now, for the first time, waiting didn't feel like an option. I opened the smallest box first. Inside were Christmas ornaments wrapped in old newspaper. A tiny wooden sled Ethan had made in elementary school. A clay handprint with my name scratched across the back. One of Dad's old pocket flashlights that probably hadn't worked in 15 years. I smiled despite everything. Dad never threw away anything that carried a memory. Mom used to joke that if she let him, he'd save every birthday card he'd ever received. The joke was true. Halfway down the box, I found a stack of greeting cards tied together with blue string. Birthdays, Father's Days, Christmases. Most of them had little notes written inside. Not just signatures. Conversations. I'd forgotten our family used to write to each other that way. I set the cards aside and reached for the next box. Photo albums. Vacation pictures. Camping trips. My high school graduation. Dad standing beside Ethan's first car. Mom laughing with flour on her face while making Christmas cookies. For a long moment, I simply stared. If someone had shown me those pictures without context, I would have said we looked like a happy family. Maybe we were. Or maybe photographs only captured the moments everyone wanted to remember. Around noon, I opened the largest box. The label read, House Files. Inside were neatly arranged folders. Home insurance. Mortgage statements. Appliance warranties. Property taxes. Exactly what I expected. Until I noticed something that didn't fit. A plain manila folder. No label. Just my father's handwriting in the upper right corner. HM. I frowned. Those were my initials. I slid the folder out carefully. Inside were only a few pieces of paper. The first was a photocopy of my physical therapy license from years earlier. The second was a newspaper clipping from when our hospital opened its new rehabilitation wing. There was a picture of several staff members. I was standing in the back row, smiling awkwardly at the camera. Dad had circled my face with a blue pen. Underneath, he'd written 3 words. Proud of you. I swallowed hard. I couldn't remember the last time anyone in my family had said those words to me. Maybe because my father never needed to say them very often. He had a habit of showing them instead. There were other little things in the folder. A program for my college graduation. A copy of an award I'd received for community service. An article about a charity walk I'd helped organize. Nothing expensive. Nothing important to anyone else. Just little pieces of my life that my father had quietly saved. I sat back against the couch. For years, I'd wondered if Dad had noticed how hard I kept trying. Apparently he had. There was a knock on my apartment door. I checked the peephole. Marcus. I opened the door. I figured you might forget to eat today, he said, holding up a paper bag from the neighborhood deli. You know me too well. I've worked with you for 11 years. He stepped inside, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. Turkey sandwich. Chicken soup. And yes, I remembered the pickle. I laughed softly. I owe you. You can repay me by actually eating. His eyes drifted toward the open boxes covering my living room floor. So, find anything? I handed him the folder with my initials. He carefully looked through each item without saying a word. Finally, he looked up. Your dad kept all of this? I forgot these things even existed. Marcus ran a thumb across the edge of the newspaper clipping. You know what stands out? What? None of this is about achievements. I frowned. What do you mean? Look, he pointed to the papers one by one. Your license, the charity event, the graduation, the hospital article. They all have one thing in common. I thought about it. I don't know. They're moments you help people. I'd never noticed. He was right. There wasn't anything about salary increases. Nothing about promotions. Nothing flashy. Just reminders of times I'd chosen to care for someone else. That sounds like your father knew exactly who you were. His words settled over the room. For a moment, Thanksgiving felt farther away. Not forgotten. Just quieter. Marcus handed the folder back to me. So what's the plan? I keep looking. For what? I honestly don't know. He nodded. Fair enough. After lunch, Marcus headed home, leaving me alone with the boxes again. The afternoon sun had shifted across the windows by the time I reached the bottom of the house files box. Most of it was exactly what I'd expected. Old receipts, repair invoices, insurance renewals. Then, tucked beneath a thick folder of tax documents, I found a long white envelope. It had never been sealed. Across the front, in my father's familiar handwriting, was a single line. Estate correspondence. The envelope felt surprisingly light. Inside was only one folded sheet of paper. Not a letter. Not legal documents. Just a typed appointment confirmation. Richard Kim, attorney at law. The meeting date caught my attention immediately. It was scheduled just 3 weeks before my father died. I read it again, then a third time. As far as I could remember, my father had never mentioned meeting with an attorney during those final weeks. Maybe he hadn't wanted to worry anyone. Maybe I'd simply forgotten. But one detail refused to leave my mind. The appointment wasn't canceled. Someone had written a note across the bottom in blue ink. Completed. Originals provided. Originals. Provided to whom? I turned the page over. Nothing. I looked back inside the envelope. Empty. No copies. No explanation. No names. Just 4 typed words that suddenly seemed much more important than they had any right to be. Originals provided. For the first time since I started opening the boxes, I wasn't just remembering my father. I was looking at the first piece of evidence that suggested there were still parts of his final days I had never been told. The envelope stayed on my coffee table for the rest of the afternoon. I must have picked it up a dozen times. Every time I read the words originals provided, I hoped they would suddenly make more sense. They never did. Instead, more questions kept piling up. Originals of what? Who received them? Why had I never heard about this meeting? Dad had been sick during those last few weeks, but his mind had remained sharp. Even on difficult days, he liked knowing where everyone was and what everyone was doing. If he'd met with an attorney that close to the end of his life, it probably wasn't a casual appointment. I reached for my phone. There was no guarantee Richard Kim was still practicing. The appointment confirmation was more than 4 years old. I searched his name. To my surprise, the law office still existed. The website looked outdated, but the address matched the one on the paper in front of me. I hesitated before calling. What was I supposed to say? Hi, I'm trying to figure out why my mother publicly humiliated me at Thanksgiving. That wasn't exactly a legal question. Still, the appointment confirmation existed for a reason. I dialed the number. A receptionist answered after the 3rd ring. Good afternoon, Kim and Associates. Hi, my name is Helena Moreau. How can I help you today? I glanced down at the paper. I'm calling about an estate matter involving my late father, Frank Moreau. There was the sound of typing. One moment, please. Soft piano music filled the silence. I hadn't expected my heart to beat so fast over a phone call. After about a minute, another voice came on the line. Ms. Moreau? Yes. My name is Amanda. I help manage archived client files. Thank you for speaking with me. Of course. How can I help? I explained that I'd found an appointment confirmation among my father's papers. I was wondering if Mr. Kim might remember the meeting. There was another pause. I'm sorry, she said gently. Mr. Kim retired about 2 years ago. Oh, I'm afraid he isn't in the office anymore. The small burst of hope I'd been carrying began to fade. But I waited. We do maintain archived files. I straightened in my chair. If you're an immediate family member, there may be documents we're allowed to confirm exist, depending on what they are. Confirm, not necessarily release. That made sense. There were privacy rules, legal procedures. I understood that. I wasn't expecting confidential information, I said. I just found something that confused me. Amanda's voice softened. If you'd like, I can search the archive index. Please. More typing. This time it lasted longer. I found myself staring at my father's handwriting while waiting. Finally, Amanda spoke again. I do see a file under Frank Moreau. My pulse quickened. It's listed as closed. Does it mention what was in it? I'm afraid I can't discuss the contents over the phone. I understand. Another pause. I can tell you one thing. What's that? There were amendments. I frowned. Amendments? Yes. To what? I'm sorry. That's all I'm authorized to confirm. I leaned back slowly. Dad hadn't simply met with an attorney. He'd changed something. Something important enough to create amended documents. Would it be possible to schedule an appointment? I asked. Certainly. I'd like that. Amanda checked the calendar. The earliest opening is next Thursday morning. I'll take it. She confirmed the time before ending the call. For several minutes, I didn't move. I simply sat there, looking at the appointment confirmation that had started all of this. Amendments. The word echoed in my mind. My father had changed something. The question was whether anyone had ever told me. My phone buzzed against the table. A text from Ethan. Can we please meet? Just coffee. No, Mom. I stared at the message. A week ago, I would have agreed immediately. Now I found myself reading it 3 times. Not because I didn't want to see him, because I wasn't sure what version of the story he believed. Before I could answer, another message appeared. I found something in Dad's garage that you should probably see. I frowned. Another thing? I typed back before I could overthink it. What did you find? The typing bubble appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally his reply arrived. I'd rather show you in person. That wasn't like Ethan. He usually avoided uncomfortable conversations. Now he was asking for one. I looked across my living room. Open boxes. Photo albums. My father's folder with my initials. The appointment confirmation. In less than 24 hours, I'd gone from believing Thanksgiving was an isolated act of cruelty to discovering that my father's final affairs might not have been as straightforward as I'd always assumed. None of it proved my mother had done anything wrong. Not yet. But for the first time, I had something more solid than hurt feelings. I had questions with names, dates, and paperwork attached to them. And next Thursday, I was going to walk into the office where my father had spent one of the last mornings of his life. Maybe I'd leave with answers. Or maybe I'd leave with even bigger questions. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. The truth hadn't started on Thanksgiving. It had started years earlier. I didn't answer Ethan's text right away. Not because I wanted to punish him. I honestly didn't know what to say. For years, if my brother asked to meet, I would have rearranged my schedule without thinking twice. We had never been especially close as adults, but we had always managed to stay on polite terms. At least I thought we had. Now every memory seemed to come with a question attached to it. Had he really believed everything Mom said about me? Or had believing her simply been easier than asking questions? My phone buzzed again. Please, Helena. Just 30 minutes. I'll come wherever you want. I read the messages twice. Marcus had always told me that avoiding uncomfortable conversations only gave them more room to grow. Maybe he was right. I replied. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Maple Street Diner. His answer came almost immediately. I'll be there. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold. The parking lot outside Maple Street Diner was nearly empty when I pulled in. The place hadn't changed in years. Same faded sign. Same front windows decorated with fake autumn leaves that probably should have come down weeks earlier. Same smell of coffee and bacon that hit you the moment you opened the door. Ethan was already there. He stood when he saw me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he gave an awkward little wave. Hi. Hi. He looked older than he had 3 days earlier. Not physically. Just tired. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. His beard looked like he'd forgotten to shave. The waitress led us to a booth near the back. She poured coffee into both mugs before either of us spoke. You want anything to eat? Ethan asked. I'm fine. You sure? I'm sure. The waitress smiled politely and walked away. Silence settled over the table. Finally, Ethan rubbed both hands together. I don't really know where to start. You could start with why there wasn't a chair. He looked down. I knew you'd ask that. And I don't have a good answer. I folded my hands around my coffee mug. Try anyway. He sighed. Mom told me Wednesday night that Thanksgiving was going to be different. Claire had used the exact same word. Different. Did she tell you why? No. What did she actually say? He thought for a moment. She said she'd spent years pretending everything was fine. My stomach tightened. Those words sounded familiar. They're almost exactly what she said before dinner. I know. You heard her. Yeah. He stared into his coffee. I didn't know she was going to do that. What did you think she meant? I thought maybe she wanted to talk. About what? You. I waited. He finally looked up. She kept saying you were pulling away from the family. I blinked. Pulling away? She said you never visited. I was there every month. I know that now. I called every week. I know. I took her to doctor's appointments after Dad died. I know. The frustration in his voice surprised me. Not because he was angry with me. Because he sounded angry with himself. I never actually counted, he admitted quietly. What? The visits. The phone calls. I just believed her. His honesty caught me off guard. There was no defensiveness. No excuses. Just regret. I leaned back in the booth. So when she said I never came around, I accepted it. When she said I didn't care, I believed that too. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Why was it so easy to believe the worst about me? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window where light snow drifted past the diner sign. When we were kids, he said finally, Mom always told me I had to look out for you. I frowned. What does that have to do with this? I thought you needed help. I didn't. I know. No, Ethan. I leaned forward. I really need you to answer me. He nodded slowly. I grew up thinking I was the responsible one. And I wasn't. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He closed his eyes for a second. I'm trying to explain it, not defend it. I let him continue. Mom always said you had a good heart, but poor judgment. The sentence landed harder than I expected. Not because it was new. Because I'd heard versions of it my entire life. Helena means well. Helena's emotional. Helena isn't practical. Helena needs guidance. I had always assumed everyone heard those comments. Maybe they hadn't. I stopped questioning it, Ethan said. Even after we were adults. He nodded. I guess I did. The waitress returned with fresh coffee. Neither of us touched it. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me since Claire called. When Mom set the table. Yeah. Did you notice there were only 11 chairs? I did. What did you say? I asked if someone wasn't coming. And, he gave a humorless laugh. She told me she'd taken care of it. My chest tightened. Taken care of it. That's exactly what she said. You didn't ask another question? I should have. But you didn't. No. The silence between us felt different now. Not comfortable. Not hostile. Heavy. Like two people realizing they'd lived inside completely different versions of the same family. After a minute, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. I wasn't lying in my text. He placed a small brass key on the table between us. I looked at it. What's that? The cabinet in Dad's garage. The old workbench. He nodded. You remember how he kept one drawer locked? I remember. He told me years ago that if anything ever happened to him, I was supposed to give this to you. I stared at the key without touching it. What? I forgot. The words came out in a whisper. I honestly forgot. You forgot for 4 years? His face filled with shame. I didn't remember until yesterday. What made you remember? I was cleaning out the garage. He swallowed hard. I found the empty key hook. And then, I realized I still had it. I looked from the key to my brother. My father had wanted me to have it. Not Ethan. Me. Without saying another word, I reached across the table and picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, worn smooth around the edges, as if my father had used it hundreds of times. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Ethan quietly said something I hadn't expected. I don't think Thanksgiving was the beginning. I closed my hand around the key. I don't either. It feels like we missed something a long time ago. I thought about the envelope, the attorney, the amended documents, the folder with my initials. Now this key. One clue by itself could have meant nothing. Together, they were beginning to form a pattern. I slipped the key into my coat pocket. I guess, I said softly, it's time to find out what Dad wanted me to see.